If you work for the Catholic Church and want to transform the culture of your parish and put more souls in the pews, we're here to help. I'm Ty Hua, here with my co-host John Konz, and this is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, your favorite leadership development podcast for Catholic churches. Each week you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today we're discussing leading a parish cluster, navigating leadership challenges, and shaping the vision for the future. John, how are you?
It is a good day. It's good to be here with you, Ty.
Yeah, so for our listeners, I probably don't sound like myself. I got Invisalign, so now I have a little bit of a lisp.
Do you have it in right now?
I do.
I can't wait for this.
Yeah.
But you look handsome as ever, Ty. And now with your Invisalign, you'll be getting handsomer every week. So if you haven't followed us on YouTube, you can go ahead to YouTube, hit the bell, like and subscribe, and you can watch Ty's progress as the many become one in his teeth.
Yeah, the gaps narrowed. Watch the gaps narrow.
That's there's a metaphor there. That's what we're all about in this podcast, is looking at where we are, where God is calling us to be, and then addressing the gap in between. So this is the podcast. We are Invisalign for Catholic churches.
Amazing.
Can we get sued for saying that? Maybe I shouldn't say that.
Well, I don't know about sued, but hopefully we get sponsored by some dentist's office.
If you know somebody, if you're listening to this and you know someone, send this on to them.
Yeah, Dr. McKinney at Great Plains Dental in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Special shout out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, today though, we are diving into and continuing our conversation on parish clusters. This is a growing reality, especially here in the Midwest where we're located and the parishes we go to. Especially if you're in the area where there are a lot of rural parishes, there's just a reality of the shortage of priests available, the number of parishes, and the number of parishioners. And one of the things that dioceses are beginning to do is to group parishes together. And that's due to demographic shifts. It's the financial strain that's from having so many buildings so far apart and a shrinking number of people in the leadership. So there's a real need for greater unity. And sometimes that looks like a grouping or a cluster or an actual official canonical parish merge. Either way, with these groupings, with these merges, there's a lot of leadership challenges that arise. There's a lot of leadership difficulties that come out, decisions that need to be made about resource allocation, the leadership roles, and the merging of parishes' staffs. But most importantly, what we need to do is unify these different communities under a shared vision. And that's what we're going to dive in today. So even though there's a real emotional toll, and I know that this is a heartbreaking process for many parishioners, some of whom maybe were part of, like, their family founded the parish they go to. Like, you can't underestimate the emotional toll that it takes on people, as well as the staff that have to bear the brunt of that real grief that comes through. So there's going to be resistance to change. There's going to be fear of the unknown, and there's just a sense of loss for what once was. But here's the promise, and this is what I want you to know, is that if you listen today, if you take these principles and apply them, if you lead this cluster, this grouping of parishes with clear vision and with empathy, it can be a real opportunity for renewal and growth. So stick with us through this. I know that the work ahead of you is daunting. It's a big challenge, but if you lean into it, if you trust Jesus, if you follow through, there's real growth, there's real fruit, and there's just the beauty of what God is doing in your community that you have to experience. And so we want to lead with a key scripture verse, and this is not a new verse to anybody, but it is a source of great consolation from Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. The Lord says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." This passage reminds us that even in challenging times, even when our hearts are breaking, God is guiding the process. These mergers, these clusters, even though they're difficult, they are a part of God's plan, and it's an opportunity to align the parishes with God's will and create something new that's going to bless the community in ways that we can't even see yet. So again, we want to remember, the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. They are plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Speaking of hope and a future, we can see Ty. That was your vocation at work right there.
That was my vocation. Yeah. At work from home is opening a jar for my wife.
If you're not watching this on YouTube, Ty's wife just handed him a can of peaches to open.
Well, Father Andrew, who we just had on, said, happy wife, happy life.
The primary vocation supersedes this little vocational. Yeah. Never.
One thing that, just going back to the problem and the promise, and I think along the lines of that, if you read into it, there's a warning as well, right? Like if we keep doing what we've been doing,
we're going to get what?
We're going to keep getting what we've been getting. And I think, I don't know why I just connected this, but like in Northwest Iowa, where you are, John, they've already been doing this cluster, right? The Orange City area, they've got the Pilgrim cluster. Lamar's area, that's the All Saints Parish. You're right. They've closed down parishes. A good friend of mine who is in that Akron Westfield area, they closed down that church, and they either have or they're in the process of closing it down. But her question when we launched CMP was, how do we stop that from happening? Well, we cannot, right? CMP can't. We can help parishes that are struggling now, or parishes that have already clustered, to be able to execute on a vision, because so much of the cluster comes down to financial, right? Well, when people leave the church, when people leave the parishes, so goes their money. So we can't do that. If we can't execute well, if we can't save the souls are going to go somewhere else. So I think for me, I'm seeing both sides of it. The Northwest Iowa version of the Set Ablaze, where I feel Sioux Falls, the Diocese of Sioux Falls, is doing better. It's because they have a plan, right? They're discerning. It's so much more than just the financial reasons to kind of merge parishes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and that really speaks into, as we get into like the three things, that really gets into it. And what Sioux Falls is doing really well, and what our listeners will hear next week, is that Bishop DeGrood, before they even made any changes, he communicated a very clear, unified vision. And that is absolutely essential, because what that does is it sets the bar, it sets the distance, it sets the goal from which and towards which all of everything is ordered. So before they even have a conversation about should this parish stay open, should it stay closed, and I don't even think they're having those conversations. Before they do any of that, though, they're saying, what is it we're trying to do here? And what they were trying to do is align everything behind one objective, which was to make lifelong Catholic missionary disciples through God's love. That was the vision. And so before the Set Ablaze even happened, that was communicated. And they put it everywhere. It was on everything. They probably have napkins with it on it in their parishes, right? It's very clear. And so what parish leaders need to do, and if you're in the midst of this, right, and I'm in Northwest Iowa, and they've already gone through the parish clustering, but there's no cohesive vision or specific guidance about how to get that through. So in the absence of, from on high, from the bishop down, a clear vision being articulated, you as the pastor need to step in and discern. And what's really cool about this, what's really beautiful, is it puts you in a position to say, okay, God, what are you calling me to do? And from that, in your role as the pastor, from that, then you get to pass on to the people, this is what God is doing here. And this is why these things are happening. This is why we're going to start this conversation. And you can even tell them how this is going to strengthen the church's mission. Our parishioners, they are hungry for their pastors to share, to use that prophetic voice of their vocation, of their ordination, their prophetic voice, to tell them this is what God is doing in your life, to help parishioners to understand this is what God is doing, right? So even though there might be some practical conversations of we work with these people, we are creating these events to bring together these communities, this is why. This is, again, we say it all the time, this is where we're going, this is why. And if you can articulate that to people, they will follow you, right? So this isn't just about resource allocation. It's about building a stronger, more vibrant community that's focused on evangelization. It's focused on service. It's focused on faith. And as the leaders, our pastors should ensure they should have taken time to discern and put voice to the thing that God is doing so that everybody understands how this merger, even though it might be painful, even though it might not make sense, it fits into God's greater plan, and that the outcome is going to benefit the entire parish community, all of the faithful gathered, that there's a great spiritual benefit here that comes from that unified vision.
Yeah, I just think nothing long-term wise is good when you're just constantly reallocating.
Say more about that.
Well, you just say, hey, when I think of reallocating, you're taking from one area and giving it to another. Well, if you're doing that, what's going to happen to the place that you just took that from? What's going to happen when you constantly have to move around, resources? You're eventually going to run out of resources. So I think reallocating for the long-term health of the parish, it just isn't a good thing. We also have to have, now I understand the reality that sometimes it's necessary, but we also should have a plan to replenish and to grow, right? You're going to talk about cultivating here pretty soon. We have to have that ability to cultivate more resources, whether that's, more people, more money, more whatever. Father Andrew talked about the different things that he saw benefit to. One was like a maintenance person. I don't know, I forget what he called it, but it was somebody to take care of the plaster.
Facilities manager, essentially.
Yeah.
The pastor shouldn't have to be running around figuring out who's going to come and plaster that corner that got wet one year because the roof leaked.
Yeah. So, as far as reallocating, I just, man, that just gives me the heebie-jeebies, because I know what's coming down the chute if you don't do something different. If all we're doing is reallocating, we're going to be merging and shutting down another parish. We're going to be taking on new parishioners constantly, and then we're going to be losing those parishioners if we aren't cultivating that soil.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us into our second point, which is that we need to foster strong collaborative leadership in that sense, because as you enter into this conversation, as you begin to look at what are the practical needs of our community and figure out what the best alignment is, there's gonna be a reality that leadership roles in the parish are going to change, and that might be as tough conversations such as, we don't need 3 youth ministers for 3 parishes that are merging. We really need one really good youth minister that can manage all the pieces. And that's going to be a different conversation. That's going to be a tough conversation. But also what it needs to do is focus beyond that towards collaboration, right? Instead of just, consolidating, we need to empower others to bring those gifts to the table, right? And that part of that is going to be building unity and building trust among the leaders from the different parishes, and getting into more of a group think as opposed to a siloed thinking that this is our parish with our resources. No, we are now many that have become one. And in a very real sense, that means that what's yours is not just yours. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. And so we have to really start thinking and shape really clear roles that have that exact same long distance mindset that you're talking about, Ty, that is not just allocating resources, that there's a bigger picture here. And I know that that's a tall order. That's a lot to think about. And sometimes it's helpful to bring someone in to kind of mediate some of those conversations. That's something that we at Catholic Ministry Professionals can do really well. We have a leadership alignment workshop that actually runs you through the process of setting vision and then creating the support and aligning your leadership team around that vision with a plan for implementation. So those are things that you don't have to do alone. Those are things that you can bring people in to help you with.
Yeah, there's all of these resources, as in the secular world anyways, to help you either learn something new or to continually educate you, right? Continuing education stuff. I just don't feel like that type of learning is promoted or pushed in the ministry world. And I think it should be. Whether that, selfishly, I'm biased, right? You should bring in CMP, but you should also consider maybe, if you're talking finances, bringing somebody in that can really hone in on the finance side of the parish. So reach out to us. I'm sure, John, you can speak more into that when they give you a call to do an assessment call or whatever.
Absolutely. So then that brings me to number 3, which Ty kind of teased out a little bit ago. Cultivating the soil of parishioners' souls, particularly through prayer and fasting. Now, this is something that I believe often we can get caught up in. How am I going to make this work? And that's where we're heavy in that in Catholic ministry professionals. We do think that God has given you the skills. You're the saint that God needs for today. Like, he's given you everything you need and the people and the resources, all that you need to be able to be successful in the mission field that he has called you to. That said, there is a real spiritual reality that underlies all of this. And so I want to encourage you to look at it through that spiritual lens. There's the story of the boy that was deaf and mute, that the disciples are trying to run the demon out of him, like exorcise the demon out of him. They're trying to cast the demon out, and they couldn't. And Jesus comes up and he just drives the demon out. And the disciples say, "Hey, why couldn't we drive that spirit out?" And he says, "These kinds can only come out through prayer and fasting." I think a parish merger, as much as it is a time to really practically have real conversations, to really look at where we need to go, to be able to communicate vision with clarity and with empathy, it's just as much a time. Like, don't let the devil play with this. You want to fight the devil with everything you've got. You don't want him to have space here. A parish merger, a parish clustering, it's a time of transition, and it requires spiritual preparation. So again, prayer and fasting are these tools that Jesus gave us to really fight against the devil in a real way. And so invite God to transform hearts and minds and open them to his will. If you are not praying and fasting for your parishioners to protect them against the way that Satan wants to take this unified vision and break it into pieces, then you're missing something. So again, you need to have intentional prayer, intentional fasting for these people so that God can really work in and transform their hearts, open them to his will. While you can pray and fast, we have to remember that it ultimately is God who transformed their hearts. So it's all about encouraging the parishioners into this process, but making it a sacred practice, making it a sacred place, knowing that it hopefully will align their hearts with God's plan. And we want to remember that, as Ezekiel says in chapter 36, verse 26, God desires to place a new heart and put a new spirit within them. And so God says, "I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh." So this transformation is what we're after. And I think everything you can do on your end, not just practically, but spiritually as well, to cultivate that soul, those are all good things. Other stuff that I've heard of too, like if you're having a meeting, and I've heard of this being really fruitful and actually taking effect, if you're having a meeting with people, like sacred salts, having holy water there for people to bless themselves on the way in, these are real ways that the spiritual reality can bolster and carry the practical reality of the conversations you're going to need to have. And again, with all of this stuff, if you're not sure where to start, we've got resources at CatholicMinistryProfessionals.com. You can reach out to us and set up a discovery call, or even just start with our book, CatholicMinistryProfessionals.com/book. It is your roadmap for parish renewal and growth. And I think with that, let's move on to the devil's advocate.
Well, John, parish clusters are too difficult. Parishioners won't accept it. We're risking alienating people. Some parishioners have been there for decades, and it's hard to imagine them welcoming a cluster. How can we push through this without losing people?
That's a legitimate concern. And I don't want to, usually I giggle to try and cut the tension here, but that's a legitimate concern. I understand that. Change is hard, and especially if it involves long-standing traditions. There's a tradition you got to cut out because now we're more than one community. When there's deep connections, we've always been us as a parish. Now we are more than just us, and we got to bring these strangers in. Those are hard. But the problem is that that avoiding change leads to stagnation. So in the face of all these challenges, we have to really lean on God. God is your strength. While we might fear losing people, we need to remember that Jesus wasn't afraid to lose people. He didn't want to lose people, but he was willing to let people walk away. So the real question is, can we afford to maintain the status quo, knowing it might not serve the long-term health of the parish, but also that it's not going to serve the kingdom that God desires to grow? So I want to remind us, we talked really about leading with empathy and clear communication, and how this is going to help parishioners bridge that gap. You're going to have to hold their hands a little bit at cast the vision for them and the cluster, and help them to feel supported in the transition. It's not about rushing them. It's about walking alongside them, giving them patience, understanding, and prayer, and a clear invitation forward. Because if you can show the parishioners how the cluster will lead to stronger ministry, to more vibrant parish life, to longer faith engagement with their children, eventually their resistance is going to soften. That heart of stone is going to become a heart of flesh. So we have to trust that with empathy, with prayer, and ultimately with God's guidance, that you will be able to lead your parish through this difficult time with just a renewed sense of hope and mission.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like a jerk, but I'm pretty good at doing that.
Lead with your strengths, Ty.
We're going to lose people anyways. Right. So do you want to try to at least help them to see the bigger picture with this cluster or realignment or merger, whatever you want to call it? Like, essentially, if we keep going the way we're going, their parish is going to close and they got to find a new parish anyways. So why don't we help them kind of ease into that transition with a bigger picture, with a plan, with a larger goal that we're trying to do, like what Sioux Falls is doing with Set Ablaze. So I think understanding that just because you don't do anything, like, it's not like their parish is going to stay open. Because the fact of the matter is, there's a reason we're talking about mergers, is because it's not working where they're at. So let's bring them into a plan and not just another parish merger where we're constantly reallocating stuff just to get by. We don't want to get by. We want to be fruitful. We want to prosper, right? Because Jesus talks about a good tree bears good fruit. And a tree that doesn't bear fruit gets thrown into the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that spirit, if you feel like you are stuck in that place where you guys are just getting by, you're in this merger situation, you're in a clustered situation, and you're just treading water, what I want to encourage you to do is take some actionable steps. And so we've got 3 actionable steps for you today. Of course, we never want you to leave our conversation with having something you can take action on. So the first of those is to cast vision and to cast it early. And this is the part that should actually bring excitement, bring joy, bring some fervor, give a little fire in your belly for what comes next. And by doing this, you're going to just simply, this is the practice, this is the thing I always encourage people to do, is in your time of prayer, first of all, if you're not praying, commit to prayer. Get back to it. That's your well. Go get a drink. But in your prayer, take time and just say, Lord, what is it you're calling me to do? And try to put it down in one sentence. If it's longer than that, it's too long. So just take time and just really think about, what is that Emmaus Road moments for you when you're in prayer and you're thinking about what God is trying to do here. What is the thing that lights that fire in your heart, sets your heart ablaze within you? And try to give voice to that in one clear sentence, one clear phrase, and start communicating that to everybody. Say in your meetings with your parish staff, and with your parishioners, every time you're like, I just feel like God is calling us to do this. And when you do that, you will see that it also lights the fire in their hearts. And that is something really simple that you can begin doing that will begin to percolate and start that conversation. And I would say then the other thing you need to do, the second thing, is begin engaging in really collaborative leadership. Start thinking beyond just what can I do. Start thinking about, in our meetings with our leaders from all the parishes, think about what it looks like for us to start working together. And you're going to have to start setting expectations. You're going to need to create kind of a rhythm for where we're going and why, but what does it look like us for it to implement that? And again, if you want help with that, you bring us in for a leadership alignment workshop. And you can just email me at catholicmenpros@gmail.com, and we'll set up a discovery call if you'd like to look into that. And then finally, if you are not praying and fasting for your parishioners, begin praying and fasting for them. And better yet, encourage that prayer and fasting within the community at large. There's people who have specific charisms for prayer and specifically for praying for people, that intentional prayer for others. And so encourage them, and their hearts are going to be engaged. Encourage them to pray for change. Encourage them to pray for people to come alive. And just to remember those words from God, a new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. That's what God promises for you. So cultivate the soil of parishioner souls through prayer and fasting, and invite them to be a part of that prayer and fasting on behalf of the community. The beautiful thing is that when you are choosing to sacrifice for the other, you grow in love for them. And when they find out you've been praying and fasting for me, they will experience that love on a deeper level from you. And that is, God is love. The thing we are called to do is love one another. It's a very practical and spiritual way to build up the love and the bonding of the community. All right. Thank you for listening to the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast. Next week, we are expanding on this topic with special guest, Father Andrew Dickinson of the Diocese of Sioux Falls. If you found this episode helpful, please take a few seconds, text it to a priest or a friend in ministry that can benefit from it.
And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.